Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to this week's Friday Reads, where I talk about everything I read in the last week, what I'm currently in the middle of, and what I think I'm going to get to next in the coming week. And I actually did finish some things. So first up, Sweep in Peace by Ilona Andrews. So this is the second book in the Innkeeper Chronicles series, where we're following Dina, who is an innkeeper, and her inn serves as a way station for aliens passing through this part of the galaxy. But also Earth doesn't actually know that aliens exist, so secrecy is a big issue. But in this book, so Dina's inn runs on magic, and it feeds on the energy of the guests a little bit at a time, right? And she has not been having enough guests lately to keep her inn going, and it's a very big concern. So when an arbiter, which is like a galactic official, comes to her inn and asks if she would be willing to be the site for a peace summit between these three warring factions, even though all the other innkeepers on Earth have already said no, and she knows that there's a good chance this is going to end very badly, Dina says yes, and the story goes from there. And I adored this. I think that this is such a huge step up from the first book in terms of characterization and world building and the writing and everything. It's not nearly as rough around the edges as the first book was. And I loved watching Dina. She is very quietly competent, especially I love watching her deal with people who think she's not as knowledgeable as they are. I just adore it. I really loved the fact that there were characters in this story from a different series from Ilona Andrews, so we have a bit of a crossover happening. I had read the other series previous to reading this book, so I knew them and I was really excited to see them, and I definitely have much more complicated feelings towards them, but it definitely enhanced my enjoyment of both series. And the plot of this was really interesting. I just really like a lot of this stuff that we get in this book. I really enjoy Ilona Andrews. They are really great at a number of things, having outstanding world building and a solid plot and great characters and great character interactions. And that's a lot of what we got in this book. So I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. And then we have Chosen Ones by Veronica Roth, which is an adult superhero novel. And essentially, there's a group of 5 kids who were all had the potential to be the chosen one. They met the basic requirements. So 10 years ago, they were all training together to figure out because they didn't know who was going to be the chosen one, they all trained, and then together they took down the dark one. Well, now present day, hinky things are kind of happening, and maybe magic isn't quite as gone as they thought, I think is the best way to describe that. I DNF'd this book at page 215, so I'm a little bit more than halfway through. And the thing is, what I thought I was getting into was basically these 5 people who were training and dealing with very traumatic events, and then eventually taking down this person as teenagers, as adolescents. I mean, they were varying ages, but pretty young. And it was traumatic, and it was big, and they're all kind of emotionally stunted. And I thought I was getting those kinds of characters trying to figure out how to live in this world, having to deal with the gear up of something abnormal happening again. And that is kind of what I got. And it was what I got in the first part of this, the first 75 or 100 pages. But then a big thing happens, which is technically a spoiler, but they get sucked into an alternate dimension, and that alternate dimension has not defeated their dark one. And so they kind of have to do that. And I was just that's not what I signed up for. That's not what I wanted. And so I struggled with that, the fact that it felt like a bait and switch to me a little bit with the plot. I didn't necessarily like the fact that, because they got sucked into this alternate dimension, we had to spend a lot of time like building this world and building the magic. And I usually really like alternate dimensions, but I found this one to just be really boring. It didn't intrigue me in any kind of meaningful way. And I didn't really like the characters that we got stuck with. So of the 5 characters that are part of like the chosen one group, I liked 2 of them. I specifically disliked 2 of them. And then there was one where I'm like, I don't really know them. And the people that like one of them died, which is not a spoiler, it's on the back. And then one of them got left behind when they got sucked to an alternate dimension. And so I like our main character of Sloane well enough, but the other 2 characters I disliked specifically. So I hated watching them interact. So that wasn't fun either. This is an adult book, but just how it's written and the characters themselves felt not quite young adult, but very like new adult. It honestly felt new adult. And some of that is understandable because these are people who had very traumatic adolescence, and not all of them have dealt with the trauma at all. Like, they're always going to have it, but they haven't like done anything with it, therapy or anything like that. And so they are a more emotionally immature. And so even though they're technically adults, we've got like the emotional maturity level is much younger, and just how it's written, it just didn't feel like a full-blown adult novel. And then yeah, so like all of these things together made it so that when I got to page 215, I still kind of wanted to know what was going to happen, but I wasn't really enjoying my reading. I didn't specifically hate it, but I wasn't really enjoying it either. So I went ahead and just DNF'd it because like I just wasn't enjoying it enough. So this is one of those DNFs that I feel far more conflicted about than most, because it was just, I wanted it to be better than it was, and I was enjoying it for so long, and then it just wasn't fun in the middle. So yeah, so I DNF'd it. And so then I picked up Well Met by Jen DeLuca, which is the first book in, I don't know the name of the series, I think it's the Well Met series maybe, but it's an adult romantic series. And in this, we're following our main character of Emily, who just recently moved to this small town to help take care of her sister. And she gets roped into doing the local Ren Fair, where she promptly butts heads with one of the organizers of this Ren Fair. And she still decides to still go through with it, but she is, play acting as a tavern wench named Emma when a very lovely to look at pirate by the name of Captain Ian Blackthorne decides to start flirting with her, only for it to be the organizer that she was butting heads with. And the story kind of goes from there. So I struggle talking about this because my feelings on this are so mixed. There are some things that I think are done really well, and a lot that I think just didn't work. So let's go through it. So the first 75 to 100 pages, the writing itself is very rough. Additionally, our main character, Emily, is incredibly judgmental. And so she's butting heads with Simon and just assumes so many things. And we find out later that the way he's acting reminds her of her ex-boyfriend, who was just a giant douchebag. And so, she's putting that on him because she's like, oh, he must be this way because that's how my ex-boyfriend was. But the problem is, in that beginning part, we don't see enough flashbacks to the ex-boyfriend to know that's what she's doing. And it's not explicit until much later in the book. And so you're just like, wow, you're just being judgmental, which I did not like. But it does even out, the writing and her judgy nature kind of evens out as the story goes on. And actually after that, the writing flows really, really nicely. It was a very easy read. I can't say that I ever totally got next to Emily as a character, and I certainly didn't care about Simon. However, when we got to the flirting that happened like in character, that was great. It was probably my favorite part of this book, was just watching the banter happen. It was just really, really fun. However, one of the things that I struggled with is that this is another book that reads younger than adult. Or I guess the characters read younger than their ages. So Emily is 25 and Simon is 27, and it feels much more like 20, 21-year-olds. Part of that is because of the very specific problems that they have. Emily's problems are a lot to do with communication and like making assumptions and stuff. It's within the miscommunication trope, but not quite like what most people would think of when I say miscommunication trope. So but it is within there. And to me, those are much more like young people problems. Like the specific ones that she's having, like, I don't want to have this conversation because what if I hurt feelings, or what if I embarrass myself, or like, I just don't know what's going on. And like, what if I'm wrong about how I'm assuming things? And of course, like me and my like almost 35-year-old self, I was just like, just have the conversation. Who cares? Like, don't be embarrassed that you don't know. Just like figure out what the truth is. So it's hard because those are much more like, I don't want to minimize it, but it is younger people problems. Like I remember very distinctly having these issues when I was younger. So like, again, I don't want to minimize, but I'm too old for this. It's kind of where I'm at. So with that, like, I just read it as much younger, and that's not the kind of romance that I necessarily like. Additionally, I felt like, okay, so this is the second romance that I've read recently where the part of the flirting and getting to know you stage is done as a performance for others, which is actually totally fine. I don't have a problem with that. But my thing is, like, if that's the flirting, getting to know you stage, that's not a foundation to build a relationship on. That's like figuring out that you like each other. And then you have to get to know the person out of character, outside of the performance, to have a stronger foundation to build an actual relationship on. And in both instances, this book and the other book, they didn't actually spend a lot of time getting to know each other outside of the performance. And so to me, I don't actually like that, because the thing about doing like getting to know you and flirting as part of a performance is that you don't actually know how the other person feels. And in this instance, like, Emily was extremely confused as to what was happening. So it's not like she's trusting, like, it's not that positive experience of flirtation and getting to know you where it's like a shared experience. And so that's not a foundation. And maybe this is just a me thing. Again, maybe an old person thing. But to me, I looked at that and I'm like, that's not doing it for me emotionally. Especially because, again, we didn't have getting to know you really after this outside of this performance. So I didn't really appreciate that. Also, like, there was this weird part where Simon's like, I'm gonna woo you, and then he did the most generic wooing I have ever seen in my life, which I hate, because I'm like, again, old person perspective, I'm like, wooing is where you get to know the person and give them what they need or what they want, but it's specific to them. Anyway, so like, yeah, it honestly reminded me very much of a Hallmark romance where you get to know the characters, you know some basic things about the characters, but there's no depth. There's not a ton of depth to the relationship. You're not really super invested. It's just nice to see, I guess. That's what this reminded me of. But I think if I had known going in, I would have done better, because that's not generally the kind of romance that I go for. I ended up giving this 3 stars. Definitely not my favorite. On the steam level, there is an on-page sex scene, but only one. It's it's midpoint for steamy is what I will say. It's very vanilla, I will say. Anyway, yeah, 3 stars. I don't think I'm going to continue with the series. So now we have the stuff that I'm in the middle of, starting with Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky by Kwame Mbalia. So this is part of the Rick Riordan Presents line. So it's like a middle grade mythology. This is following Black American mythology, folk tales and mythology. But we're following our main character of Tristan, who is a kid in Chicago who is trying to follow in his father's and grandfather's books, or father and grandfather's footsteps to become a boxer. Not going well. His best friend recently passed away. And he has his best friend's journal and hasn't been able to bring himself to open it. So his parents sent him to go be on Grandma and Grandpa's farm in Alabama. And then one night he wakes up to find Gum Baby, who's a folk tale figure, I think, mythology figure, I'm not entirely certain, trying to steal his friend's journals. So he follows Gum Baby and sets off a chain of events which are big and bad. And the story goes from there. And in case that description didn't let you know, I'm not particularly familiar with Black American mythology or folk tales. And so this is a little bit rough because it's not really giving you a ton of background information. So like we met Gum Baby and there is a little bit of background information, but I'm just like, I don't understand. Or like we met Brer Fox and Brer Rabbit and I'm like, I've heard those names and I know nothing. Or like John Henry, which, and I'm like, again, I've heard that name, but also I got him confused with Paul Bunyan, which is a completely different thing. I looked it up, of course. I don't have the grounding to follow as well. And definitely like I'm 200 pages in and the first 100 pages, I very much felt adrift. Now, part of this is also because there is Black American mythology, and it's also Southern, and I'm not Southern. Look, I'm a white girl from California. I don't have the grounding in this to recognize a lot of these different parts, but especially like how Tristan relates to his parents and his grandparents is just very different than what I grew up with. It's not bad, it's just so very different. And so I have definitely felt a little adrift reading this. But of course, because I am like white girl from California, like this is just clearly not for me, and that's okay. And I'm going to continue reading it because I like the exposure to things that I have not heard before. But like, I'm definitely not a person to go to for a review of this, of whether it's good or bad. I'm 200 pages in, which is a little bit less than halfway. It's getting better. I'm more into the plot of this. I like Tristan a little bit better. Still don't like any of the other characters, but definitely not my usual kind of read. Now, because I was struggling a little bit with the beginning of this, I did also pick up One Fell Sweep by Alona Andrews, the third book in the Innkeeper Chronicle series. But in this one, Dina gets a note from her sister Maud, who's on a different planet, saying, please come get me. And so Dina does, and then things happen at the end, and the story kind of goes from there. I'm only 50 pages in. I love this so much. I love this is a step up from the last book. It's really good. I don't have anything more than that to say about it. I just really like it. So yeah, this has been, I read a chapter of this for every 50 pages I read in Tristan Strong, and that's been really, really helpful for motivation purposes. And then the last book that I'm in the middle of is the Hammer of Thor by Rick Riordan, which is the second book in the Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard series. And this is following Magnus Chase, who in the first book of this kind of was tracked down by his uncle and been like, hey, you should join the family business, which has to do with like Norse mythology. And Magnus is kind of forced in, I guess we should say. But in this one, the Thor's hammer has been missing for quite a while. Other weird things are happening. So Magnus decides to kind of look into it. I'm only 50 pages in. It's, you know, I liked the first one well enough. The second one is going just as well. I read only 50 pages of it, and then I put it aside to read Tristan Strong, which I'm actually reading because this is the pick for the Avengers Readathon for April. I'm technically not supposed to be reading it now, but that's why I decided to pick this one up. but I put Magnus Chase aside to read Tristan Strong. So moving into what I'm looking at for next week. So Tristan Strong is my priority. I will continue to read One Fell Sweep alongside it, but I will finish Tristan Strong before I finish One Fell Sweep. So I will continue on with One Fell Sweep as I read more in the Hammer of Thor. I would like to finish all 3 of these before Monday, if that's even possible. I'm filming this Thursday afternoon. It's possible, not very likely, but that's the goal, because on Monday is when the Magical Readathon starts for the Gear Up. That's being hosted by G over at Book Roast. I'll leave a link down below for all of the stuff related to that. But I have 2 books to read for that. The first being The Magpie Lord by KJ Charles, which is like a historical romance fantasy mystery. I don't know, I've heard good things, so I'm going to give it a try. And the other book that I'm going to read for that is Not Your Villain by C.B. Lee, which is the second book in the Sidekick Squad series. So those are all the things that I am planning to read next week, which is a little bit bonkers. I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to read all of these before next Friday. Stay tuned. You'll see how it goes next week. But that is it. Those are all, everything I read, everything I'm in the middle of, everything I'm thinking I'm going to read next week. If you have any thoughts or feelings about any of the books that I talked about, leave me a comment down below. But that's all I have for this video. So if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.